So I'll take the next two questions. So this one's from Patrick Graham. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Patrick. Decolonization is a broad movement that spans the globe with various approaches from nonviolent cultural reclaiming efforts to outright violent revolution. Material conditions are different for many of these, especially between colonies and the imperial core. What are your thoughts on learning from / incorporating decolonization teachings from other struggles outside of Turtle Island to the struggles here?
Can I start?
Go for it.
First of all, like when I'm talking to people about decolonization, I remind them that that is not a concept that comes from Turtle Island. It comes from the African context, right? Most people are familiar with it within the context of Frantz Fanon's writing, right? So he's speaking to, the context of Algeria. And like, I think we need to understand that first and foremost if we're going to use it at all. And I think a lot of Native people like totally overlook that, and they totally overlook like decolonization coming from the Black radical tradition. And that to begin with is messed up. And that to begin with, like, I think means that most people fundamentally misunderstand decolonization. And so, yeah, that's what I start with. And I think like we always need to be incorporating struggles outside of Turtle Island. Like, one, because a lot of them are like, we have a lot to learn from them. Like, a lot of them are like a lot more developed than what we have here. And I think, like, we need to like push back on US exceptionalism, like at all turns, especially when we're talking about decolonization, and understand that like it is violent in other places because our hand is forced. Like, we don't, like, they have created like such horrible conditions that we have no choice but to defend ourselves with violence. It's not that we want to, it's that we like straight up don't have a choice.
Yeah, I think the question here is kind of getting at like one thing. It's kind of this easy. I mean, I shouldn't say easy. This kind of more acceptable approach to decolonization, which would be categorically assumed or called like nonviolent, right? Which I kind of take a issue with, just because how can you be like, nonviolent in any situation, even if you're expressly advocating it, when the system and society is premised on your elimination? That's a fascinating thing for me, because even like the Dakota Access Pipeline struggles, those things never ended. Like, the police and the security state are still going after water protectors for charges and things like that, and they have taken the definition of nonviolent direct action to mean basically illegal acts. But nonviolent direct action actually just includes praying with the water as well. And so it's created a spectrum of like illegalizing what it means to be Lakota in our own landscape, and to actually have connections and to protect those relationships, the integrity of those relationships to those landscapes. That's really fascinating to me. And so it's like, it's hard for me and I think some people do try to make it into this hokey thing where it's like, all we need to do is pray with the water. And it's like, that's not actually what prayer means. Like, you make a commitment, you make a vow to, ensure the future, generations will have clean drinking water. That to me is the most sane thing to do in this moment right now. And it's being made criminal. Right. And so, but I also don't see water protectors picking up weapons, in the context of, our situation, just because it doesn't call for it. But nonetheless, it's very violent because of the reaction of the state and the reality of the material conditions that we live in. And so this whole nonviolent dogmatism, I think, is just BS, because it actually displaces where the violence, the monopoly of violence exists, which is within these policing institutions and these arms of the state that ensure pipelines get built on our land, that ensure our lands get exploited and despoiled more at a rate higher than others. So I think I just like to reframe that question, but then also recognizing within an anti-colonial tradition outside of the United States, there were other kind of attempted settler colonial projects in Africa that were reversed. I take contention with some authors and theorists that say that settler colonialism hasn't ever been overthrown. That might be true in some respects, but it has been pushed back and severely, revert or severely kind of hampered. And like some of the cases of that would be like the case of South Africa. Anti-apartheid wasn't a perfect movement, and the outcomes of it still kept intact the kind of class characteristics of the society, the ruling class and the oppressed, and just kind of like indigenized the bourgeoisie. But nonetheless, it eliminated the kind of settler animus directed towards the native people through an apartheid regime. And I would also say that the Palestinian example also shows that like settler colonialism isn't a complete process, and it has been stalled through violent resistance. First and foremost, I mean, that's just the reality. Like the Israeli state will not go into Gaza, will not go into the West Bank and these regions, because Palestinians have the right to self-defense, and they've had this codified within a human rights framework that the right to self-defense exists for nations that aren't even recognized, like Palestine. And so I think that's I'm not saying we like are, these are just different scenarios. And so that would be my answer to that question. But I don't know if you have anything else to add. We barely even got halfway through the question, so maybe we should practice some brevity.
Yeah.